The Sun King passes away, and with his final breath, an era ends after 72 years. Louis XIV ruled the kingdom with unquestioned power, turning a feudal land into Europe's leading force. However, his spectacular reign leaves behind a bitter legacy filled with overwhelming debts and endless wars. A young great-grandson, merely 5 years old, inherits a throne shimmering with gold. While the country struggles beneath the heavy burden, whispers echo through the ornate halls of Versailles about the emerging reign. As little Louis XV matures into a king, he shows more interest in hunting than in ruling. The nobility, tamed by the Sun King's complex court rituals, has forgotten how to manage their own estates, focusing instead on mastering the intricacies of ceremonial bows. They glide through countless balls and festivities while peasants in remote regions battle to survive failed harvests unknown to the aristocrats. The Ancien Regime stands like an ancient cathedral, impressive from afar, but full of fractures threatening its foundations. Society splits into three rigid orders: the clergy who pray, the nobility who fight, and everyone else who must bear the cost. The First Estate claims divine right and owns vast lands, exempt from taxes. The Second Estate holds on to feudal privileges granted by medieval ancestors, collecting rents from peasants barely able to feed their families. The Third Estate, which includes everyone from wealthy merchants to starving workers, carries the unbearable burden of supporting a system that gives them nothing in return. In the bustling, smoke-filled cafes of Paris, a fresh wave of thinkers emerges to question the long-standing beliefs that have shaped European society for over a millennium. Jean-Jacques Rousseau writes bold and revolutionary ideas destined to ignite passion across the continent. He claims man is born free but is shackled everywhere, and his concept of the social contract becomes forbidden literature, secretly shared by eager readers seeking justification for their rising unrest. Voltaire's incisive and cutting critiques pierce through religious hypocrisy and royal arrogance with precise accuracy. While exiled in England, he observes a society where merchants can ascend to power and Parliament limits the crown's authority. His insightful letters on England offer fellow countrymen enticing visions of a world where birthright matters less than talent and trade prospers without noble interference. Montesquieu's work, The Spirit of the Laws, lays out plans for reforming governments, inspiring both American revolutionaries and French advocates for constitutional change. His theory of separated powers questions absolute monarchy itself, proposing that liberty depends on institutional checks against authority instead of the supposed wisdom of rulers. Across the ocean, John Locke's ideas about natural rights and the consent of the governed infiltrate French intellectual circles through covertly distributed books and discussions. Secretly shared, his groundbreaking idea that governments gain rightful power solely from the approval of those they govern opposes everything the Bourbon monarchy stands for. These Enlightenment ideas spread across the realm like seeds scattered on fertile soil, taking hold in minds already shaped by everyday experiences of inequality and unfairness in markets and workshops. Common people start to ask why the chance of birth should decide the opportunities someone has for life. Why should a duke's insignificant son inherit boundless land? Why should a merchant's intelligent daughter always remain barred from political involvement? The 7 Years' War breaks out, draining treasury reserves faster than summer rain drenches dry earth. Louis XV's advisors borrow huge amounts to fund worldwide efforts against British expansion, placing the country's future in jeopardy to fulfill current ambitions. When peace finally comes, the kingdom confronts bankruptcy as Britain prevails, claiming territories in North America and India. Military loss wounds national pride, yet the financial disaster threatens the very existence of the monarchy. The crown's debt doubles and then triples while interest costs consume larger shares of government income. Finance ministers appear and disappear like passing trends, each promising extraordinary fixes before realizing that numbers stubbornly resist hopeful thinking. Jacques Necker is appointed as the Controller General, brought Swiss banking expertise into the midst of fiscal disorder. His groundbreaking Comptroller Rondeau published government finances for the very first time in history, unveiling a shocking reality about public spending to an audience that had never before been exposed to such revelations. Citizens learned that their taxes funded not only essential state services, but also enormous pensions for the king's favorites, lavish construction projects, and costly foreign campaigns that mainly served the nobility. This document spread rapidly across the kingdom, copied and shared until even rural farmers in distant provinces comprehended how their hard-earned money sustained the luxurious lifestyles of the aristocracy. These disclosures shattered the aura of mystery surrounding official finances, turning vague complaints into clear awareness of government waste and corruption. Meanwhile, across the ocean, American colonists rose up in protest against British taxes imposed without their consent. Enlightened onlookers observed with great interest as New World farmers and traders transformed political theories into acts of revolution. The American Declaration of Independence resonated with words that Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire might have penned themselves, declaring that governments only hold legitimate power through the approval of those they govern. Louis XV's successor, Louis XVI, was a young and well-meaning ruler, but deeply indecisive. He chose to back the American quest for independence, motivated partly by his opposition to Britain and partly by misplaced hopes that a victorious outcome would boost France's standing in the world. Finance ministers warn that intervention will lead the kingdom to bankruptcy, yet the king opts for glory instead of financial prudence. Precious metals flow across the Atlantic to equip Washington's troops, while taxpayers struggle to fulfill their own financial duties. The diamond necklace scandal erupts, shattering what little reputation the crown had left among the common people. Cardinal de Rohan, believing he can secure Queen Marie Antoinette's favor, authorizes the purchase of an extraordinarily costly diamond necklace supposedly intended for the queen. The complex fraud, masterminded by the schemer Lamotte, reveals the corruption surrounding the court and makes Marie Antoinette appear guilty of lavish spending in the midst of a national financial crisis. Popular pamphlets spread malicious gossip about the Austrian-born queen, depicting her as a foreign agent who manipulates her weak husband and wastes public funds on meaningless pleasures. She becomes a despised emblem of aristocratic excess, blamed for every political failure and government waste, whether or not she is truly responsible. Meanwhile, the agricultural crisis deepens the kingdom's misery as poor harvests push bread prices beyond the reach of ordinary Parisians. Bakers' shops turn into arenas where desperate customers clash over loaves that cost more than daily earnings. In provincial towns, food riots break out as starving masses attack granaries in frustration and desperation. Convoys headed for affluent neighborhoods witness their own children weeping from hunger. The regional courts, controlled by noble magistrates, seize this opportunity to defend their ancient privileges against the authority of the government. They refuse to approve new taxes, asserting their constitutional right to review decrees before they are enforced. Their resistance seems to be a defense of traditional freedoms against arbitrary rule. However, critics see that these parliament members mainly safeguard their own exemptions from taxes instead of the interests of the general public. Robert Jacques Turgot, appointed as Controller General, makes attempts at profound economic reforms that threaten well-established interests across the kingdom. His plans to abolish guild restrictions, dismantle internal trade barriers, and impose taxes on privileged estates offer reasonable solutions to national issues. Yet rational ideas prove powerless in the face of aristocratic opposition fiercely determined to maintain lucrative customs. Turgot's dismissal highlights the impossible position confronting ministers who seek change. Genuine reform demands confronting influential groups capable of ruining reformers' careers. The nobility and the high clergy join forces to safeguard their privileges, causing the fiscal crisis to worsen while solutions grow politically unreachable. Jacques Necker returns to power, but his second administration confronts even more severe conditions than his first. Government expenses persist in outstripping revenues, deepening the emergency without any clear remedy in sight. Despite various urgent measures and temporary solutions, revenues continue to fall short during the American War. What was originally anticipated to last a few months stretches over several years, depleting the treasury so drastically that the nation can no longer bear the expense. To address this crisis, the Assembly of Notables is called together by Charles Alexander Dalen with the intention of approving tax reforms that earlier ministers had failed to enforce. This assembly includes high-ranking nobles, clergy, and magistrates, the most privileged groups in the kingdom. These are precisely the groups that must relinquish some of their privileges for reforms to be effective. Their predictable refusal to accept higher taxes confirms that the ancien regime cannot reform itself from within. Kahn's report exposes the kingdom's dire financial position. Annual deficits exceed 100 million lever. Total debt nears 4 billion lever, and interest payments consume nearly half of all government revenues. The assembled notables are stunned by these numbers, which informed observers had suspected for a long time, yet they reject any proposed measures that would demand genuine sacrifice from the privileged classes. After this, Etienne Chaudemeney de Brienne takes over from Calonne, inheriting an impossible mission to implement reforms that the Assembly of Notables has already dismissed. His attempts to bypass noble opposition by direct registration of edicts in the parliaments trigger a constitutional crisis that brings the government to a standstill while financial collapse speeds up. The parliaments respond by insisting on the convocation of the Estates General, an ancient representative assembly that has not convened since the early 17th century is now awakening. Their call echoes across the kingdom as different groups find common ground in their desire to limit authority, albeit for very distinct reasons. Nobles aim to protect their traditional privileges, while commoners, fearing reforms, seek representation that could address their grievances. Local provincial assemblies begin to meet in order to choose deputies and create detailed lists of complaints which will guide the representatives at the upcoming Estates General. These grassroots meetings become important centers for political engagement, teaching everyday people how to voice their concerns, suggest remedies, and select leaders from within their own communities. In countless village gatherings, peasants meticulously document their burdens, including feudal dues, church tithes, taxes, labor obligations, and hunting restrictions that preserve aristocratic game, even as crops are damaged. Urban craftsmen oppose guild rules that inhibit economic progress and favor established masters over ambitious new rivals. The bourgeoisie, made up of educated professionals, prosperous merchants, and minor officials, emerge as the most persuasive voice of the Third Estate. Lawyers, doctors, and businessmen hold both complaints against aristocratic privilege and the eloquence needed to powerfully express popular frustrations. They are well-versed in the political ideas of the Enlightenment and can turn these principles into persuasive arguments for change. Every day, theory and reality reveal the limits imposed by social hierarchies based on birth. Parish priests, although officially part of the First Estate, often find themselves more aligned with their parishioners than with affluent bishops who live like worldly princes. These lower-ranking clergy witness hardships and misery that their higher ecclesiastical authorities scarcely experience, building up tensions within the church that are about to explode into open conflict. As winter ends and spring begins, the nation stands on the brink of revolution. The king has pledged to convene the Estates General in May, raising hopes throughout the kingdom, though offering no clear answers to the crises that require such drastic steps. Financial ruin seems unavoidable. Social unrest hits critical levels, and political institutions prove powerless to handle the changes that the situation demands. In workshops, markets, country lanes, and city streets, ordinary people sense that monumental shifts are near. They cannot predict the chaos and bloodshed ahead, the wars and terror that will engulf their children's futures, or the transformation that will reshape not just their country, but the entire world. They only understand that the old system is fading and a new one must emerge from its ashes. The ancien regime has cultivated the seeds of its own downfall through years of financial recklessness, social disparities, and political inflexibility. At this moment, the seeds are ready to burst forth in the revolutionary spring of 1789 when the Estates General convenes at Versailles and releases forces beyond anyone's control. The spark has been ignited and the explosion lies just ahead. Spring dawns upon Versailles filled with unusual eagerness as the grandest palace in Europe readies itself for an event unseen within living memory. Carpenters assemble benches in the Salle des Menus Plaisirs, making space for 1,200 deputies who will stand for 25 million subjects at the first convocation of the Estates General since the era of Louis XIII. The sound of hammering carries down corridors where courtiers murmur about this unparalleled assembly that promises to redefine the future of the kingdom. Abbé Emmanuel Joseph publishes a pamphlet flooding the realm like lightning through a summer sky. His question, "What is the Third Estate?" sharpens months of mounting frustration into a clear revolutionary vision. His response echoes through every bourgeois salon and craftsman's workshop. Everything. What has it been in the political order up to now? Nothing. What does it seek to become? Something. These words turn vague discontent into specific political demands. The Third Estate makes up 98% of the population, produces all useful labor, generates all wealth, yet holds no genuine voice in ruling. Caste demonstrates with overwhelming logic that the nation and the Third Estate are virtually identical, exposing aristocratic privilege as illegitimate and untenable. Not only unjust, but also ridiculous. The widespread distribution of the pamphlet demonstrates the influence of print media in shaping public sentiment in ways earlier generations could not have foreseen. Inexpensive printing presses disseminate ideas more rapidly than authorities are able to ban them, giving rise to a clandestine network of political communication functioning outside conventional control systems. Coffee houses turn into hubs of democratic discourse, where merchants engage in discussions about constitutional principles with the same depth as university scholars. Elections for the Estates General awaken sluggish provincial towns, transforming them into vibrant centers of political consciousness. Guilds formerly focused only on trade matters suddenly see their members debating natural rights and popular sovereignty. Local assemblies, normally concerned with minor community issues, start creating manifestos that question the very foundations of royal authority. The voting process itself becomes an educational revolution. For the first time ever, common people take part in selecting representatives who will advocate for their concerns at the highest echelons of government. Peasants realize they have the power to elect delegates who comprehend their hardships. Urban laborers understand their opinions carry weight in choosing spokespeople who share their everyday realities. These delegates, coming from every region of the kingdom, compile an unprecedented list of popular complaints and suggested reforms, marking a crucial moment of widespread political engagement and transformation. Documents unveil the extensive dissatisfaction with the current system. Rural communities demand the end of seigneurial privileges, while urban guilds pursue the removal of internal trade barriers. Various professional groups advocate for opportunities based on merit rather than lineage. These records also display an extraordinary agreement that crosses geographic and social divisions. Whether composed in Norman villages or Provençal towns, within artisan workshops or bourgeois salons, the grievances share common themes: taxation without representation, legal inequality, economic constraints, and social unfairness. The kingdom expresses a unified condemnation of the centuries-old system governing it. The delegates arrive with a ceremony matching the significance of the event. They march through the city adorned in medieval attire that highlights the hierarchical differences the Third Estate increasingly challenges. Nobles don silk and feathers. Clergy wear religious robes, but the Third Estate appears dressed in simple black fabric, deliberately underscoring their exclusion from aristocratic luxury. Yet, appearances can be misleading. Among those black-robed deputies walk some of the kingdom's brightest intellects: lawyers versed in constitutional principles, doctors applying scientific methods to social issues, merchants knowledgeable about economic theory, and writers skilled in persuasive speech. Although they lack noble titles, they hold something potentially more powerful: greater and more influential ideas capable of transforming the world emerge during the opening ceremonies, where underlying tensions soon escalate into open strife. Louis XVI delivers a speech acknowledging the financial crisis, but fails to propose any radical reforms. He addresses his subjects not as a constitutional monarch answerable to the people, but as a kindly sovereign requesting their support. His language reveals a mindset grounded in the belief that his power is divinely ordained, even while he seeks assistance from those he regards as socially inferior. Jacques Necker follows with an in-depth financial report confirming what informed observers already suspect. The kingdom stands on the brink of insolvency. His data offers tangible proof supporting the general grievances, illustrating that irresponsible fiscal practices have triggered a crisis threatening the nation's very existence. However, even Necker's proposed solutions remain confined by conventional views of monarchical authority. Meanwhile, the Third Estate arrives in Versailles, carrying explicit instructions from its voters to demand a vote based on the head count rather than by order. This approach ensures that numerical dominance will translate into actual political influence. What seems like a mere procedural matter is in fact a critical issue determining whether the Estates General will sustain aristocratic privileges or introduce real popular representation. The entire future hinges on the method used for vote counting, while the nobility and clergy await the outcome, aware of the danger posed to their dominant status. They insist on separate discussions by estates where their united opposition can block any reforms that threaten their traditional privileges. They realize that voting by head count would empower the Third Estate, supported by sympathetic nobles and clergy, to overcome conservative resistance. A constitutional stalemate seems immediate and complete. Several days pass with fruitless attempts to resolve the procedural dispute through negotiations. The Third Estate refuses to confirm credentials or begin real business until voting rules are settled. The privileged orders insist on separate deliberations. Government officials try to mediate, but offer no solutions that address the core conflict between democratic and aristocratic ideals. Frustration grows among the Third Estate deputies who journeyed vast distances to represent their community's interests but find themselves blocked by procedural tactics meant to maintain the inequalities they want to change. They feel this moment is their sole chance to accomplish real reform, which makes compromise seem like betraying the hopes entrusted to them. The deadlock ends when the Third Estate takes bold revolutionary action that alters the Assembly's character. On June 17th, following Abiez's proposal, they proclaim themselves the National Assembly of the nation, claiming exclusive authority to represent the people. This courageous act changes a medieval institution into a modern representative assembly while implicitly denying the authority of privileged estates. The declaration echoes through Versailles like thunder, signaling an impending storm. Nobles and clergy instantly realize that accepting this statement would reduce them to ordinary citizens whose opinions hold no special influence in national discussions. The Third Estate has not only opposed certain policies, but has condemned the entire social system that has ruled the kingdom for 1,000 years. 3 days afterward, the newly announced National Assembly arrives at their usual meeting place, only to find the doors locked and guarded by soldiers. Government officials explain they require the space for ceremonial arrangements, but the deputies see a clear attempt to intimidate them into giving up. The administration hopes that refusing them access to their meeting hall will make them renounce their revolutionary demands. Instead, they move to a nearby tennis court where they take a solemn oath that marks the birth of constitutional governance in the kingdom. Led by the astronomer Jean Sylvain Bailly, who becomes their president, they vow never to separate until they have created a constitution that guarantees the rights of the people and restricts the powers of the government. The tennis court oath transforms these legal representatives into revolutionary lawmakers claiming the authority to create a new political order. To transform the fundamental law of a nation, they no longer simply request reforms but claim the power to establish new institutions grounded in popular sovereignty instead of inherited privilege. The constitutional revolution has commenced. The government's reaction fluctuates between concession and resistance, mirroring Louis XVI's hesitant nature and the conflicting counsel he receives from ministers, courtiers, and relatives. Some advisors urge the immediate suppression of the assembly to prevent their demands from spreading across the kingdom, while others suggest accommodation to steer the revolutionary fervor toward moderate change. The king seeks a middle ground by convening a session where he will announce concessions intended to address popular demands without giving up crucial royal rights. His suggested reforms include holding regular meetings of the Estates General, restricting taxation without consent, and ending certain feudal privileges. However, he insists on keeping separate deliberations for each estate and preserving essential sovereign powers. This session backfires dramatically when the Third Estate refuses to disperse after the king commands them to break into the traditional estates. When a master of ceremonies repeats the order, Honoré Gabriel Rondeau, a noble allied with the Third Estate, replies with revolutionary resolve, "We are here." The phrase, "by the will of the people, and we will not leave except by the force of bayonets," electrifies the deputies. They realize they have crossed the boundary from lawful opposition to revolutionary defiance. No longer mere subjects petitioning their ruler, they now stand as delegates of a sovereign people who assert ultimate control over the government. The clash at Versailles transforms into a battle of determination between competing ideas of political legitimacy. Meanwhile, an economic crisis combined with political uncertainty creates volatile conditions in Paris, where unemployment grows as businesses collapse and food prices rise beyond the reach of average families. Artisans, who usually concern themselves with guild rules, now struggle to feed their children. Day laborers find that their wages fail to cover basic needs. The capital becomes a tinderbox waiting for a spark. News from Versailles sparks unrest among Parisian crowds already enraged by hunger and economic despair. The political upheaval unfolding in the assembly strikes a chord with people facing daily hardships caused by the failure of existing systems. Their own difficulties begin to seem part of a larger crisis demanding radical change instead of small reforms. Street speakers emerge in markets and public squares, explaining constitutional shifts in language accessible to ordinary citizens. They link abstract political ideas to the realities experienced by the common people. Concrete complaints reveal how aristocratic privileges worsen the suffering of the general population as the revolution gains momentum. From debates in Parliament to the growing awareness among common citizens, Camille de Moulin stands out as a powerful orator. He employs his legal expertise and journalistic talents to turn complex political ideas into persuasive calls for change. His pamphlets spread rapidly through working-class districts where increased literacy has created a large audience eager for political material. Thoughts that were once limited to elite groups now reach artisans' workshops and laborers' gathering places, intensifying public unrest. The situation grows even more tense when Louis XVI dismisses Jacques Necker, the finance minister who symbolized reform to ordinary people. News of Necker's removal spreads swiftly across Paris, convincing many that the king has firmly sided with aristocratic forces against the people's interests. This decision seems to confirm suspicions that compromise is out of reach. Crowds assemble in the Palais Royal area, where the Duke of Orleans has established a semi-independent zone, encouraging political debate free from royal interference. Speakers condemn the dismissal as proof of a plot to destroy the Third Estate and reinstate absolute monarchy. The atmosphere shifts dramatically from protest to revolt, with calls to resist despotic rule growing louder. On Sunday, July the 12th, the first fierce confrontations erupt between civilians and soldiers as the crowds try to block. The withdrawal of troops, who might be called back to quell popular unrest, marks a turning point. The walls dividing political protest and direct resistance begin to fall apart. As constitutional disputes erupt onto the streets of the capital, customs barriers around Paris become focal points of public rage, with crowds attacking the tax system long viewed as a symbol of oppressive government control. The burning of toll houses signifies more than just economic grievance. It embodies the symbolic dismantling of the regime's hold on everyday life. The revolution shifts from parliamentary debate to mass action. The question of arms becomes urgent as Parisians recognize that political demands cannot succeed without physical power. The arsenal at the Invalides houses thousands of muskets that could arm a citizen militia, but the fortress itself seems impossible for civilians to conquer. Despite this, hunger and despair push people to try what military wisdom considers unfeasible. The crowd gathering before the Bastille on the morning of July 14th includes artisans, shopkeepers, laborers, and even some bourgeois supporters who view the fortress's walls as emblems of despotic rule. They demand the powder stored inside the medieval stronghold. But Governor Bernard René Jean Dion refuses to open the gates that have never before yielded to popular force. Negotiations break down when shots ring out. Whether fired by defenders or attackers remains unclear, and the crowd storms the fortress, driven by the fury of months of build-up and oppression. The Bastille falls not because of superior military might, but due to the fierce resolve of revolutionaries, showing that willpower can defeat established authority. This medieval emblem of royal dominance collapses under the strength of popular demand. The governor's death at the hands of the crowd signals that this uprising will not be a mere calm discussion among educated elites. Violence became part of the struggle, shifting political disagreement into a battle of life and death. The heads displayed on pikes through the streets of Paris declared that those resisting the people's demands would suffer real consequences. News of the Bastille's fall spread across the kingdom with remarkable speed. Couriers raced through the night to share the unbelievable news with far-flung provinces. The defeat of this symbol of royal power by the people demonstrated that united citizens could overcome daunting challenges. The revolution found its emblem in the liberation of the Bastille. Although the fortress held only 7 prisoners and had little military importance, the significance lies in its emotional impact on revolutionaries and their adversaries. The masses proved their strength in dismantling the physical signs of oppression. King Louis XVI received news of the day's upheaval from the Duke of La Rochefoucauld, who informed him that Paris had changed forever. Power has shifted to a popular uprising. When the king inquires if this is a rebellion, the duke corrects him with words that reveal the enormity of what has transpired. No, sire. It is a revolution. The fall of the Bastille signifies the conclusion of the old order and the start of the shift from political dissent to revolutionary change. The National Assembly has asserted constituent authority, but the people of Paris have proven that true power lies with those ready to fight for their beliefs. The revolution now possesses both lawful legitimacy and popular strength, supporting its calls for fundamental reform. August brings the great fear to the rural areas as whispers of noble conspiracies circulate through the countryside. Already burdened by crop failures and financial struggles, peasants arm themselves against imagined brigands supposedly sent by aristocrats to ruin their harvests and force obedience. These phantom forces never appear, yet the terror they cause leads to tangible effects. Manor homes are burned across the land as peasants assault the tangible symbols of feudal control. Seigneurial records documenting centuries of owed duties go up in flames, freeing communities from legal evidence of oppression. The revolution expands beyond cities, reaching the countryside, evolving from debates on governance to deep social change. The National Assembly convening in an emergency session on the night of August the 4th witnesses a remarkable scene as distinguished representatives compete to relinquish their feudal privileges. What starts as an effort to restore order transforms into a celebration of renunciation, since centuries of aristocratic advantages vanish in just a few intense hours. The legal pillars of the Ancien regime collapse beneath the surge of revolutionary zeal. The August decrees officially dismantle the feudal system that has shaped society since medieval times. Seigneurial duties, church tithes, judicial privileges, and tax exemptions all disappear in a single legislative session. The Assembly declares all citizens equal before the law, regardless of their birth or social rank. The revolution accomplishes overnight what reformers have pursued for countless generations. Yet, even as this victory is celebrated, revolutionary leaders understand that declarations must be upheld and constitutional principles secured in lasting law. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen emerges after weeks of discussion as the philosophical foundation of the new system, proclaiming universal principles that apply to all humanity rather than only to subjects under a specific monarch. The Declaration asserts that men are born free and remain equal in rights, that sovereignty lies with the nation, and that governments exist to safeguard natural rights instead of merely serving monarchical interests. These ideas resonate with American revolutionary ideals while adding a unique perspective. Continental factors reflect the social realities and philosophical ideas prevalent in Europe. In October, a fresh crisis emerges as bread shortages become dangerously severe. Rumors begin to circulate that the royal court intends to abandon Versailles for a safer place where its authority might be reestablished. Women from Paris, who bear the responsibility of feeding their households, organize a march to Versailles. Their protest intertwines demands for bread with calls for the king and queen to relocate back to Paris, where the public can keep a close watch on them. The Women's March reveals that revolutionary leadership is not confined to educated men, but also includes ordinary citizens whose everyday hardships give them a direct stake in political change. These market women may lack formal political education, yet they instinctively grasp that constitutional ideas are meaningless without tangible improvements in their lives. Marie Antoinette becomes the focus of popular anger, blame for the country's troubles. Whether justly or unjustly, she comes to symbolize everything the revolution opposes: foreign interference, aristocratic extravagance, and defiance of the common people's demands. The queen who once suggested the poor should eat cake now confront a population that has no bread and hold her accountable for their suffering. The forced relocation of the royal family to Paris marks the victory of popular sovereignty over the age-old monarchy. The king who formerly ruled from the luxurious isolation of Versailles is now compelled to live under the vigilant eyes of his subjects. The vigilant gaze of citizens who assert ultimate control over the government marks a new era. The revolution has brought the monarchy down to earth in both literal and figurative senses. As the year concludes, the foundations of the emerging order seem stable. The National Assembly has proclaimed popular sovereignty, abolished feudalism, and introduced constitutional principles that protect individual liberties. The people have shown their power by destroying royal strongholds and enforcing royal compliance. The revolution appears to have fulfilled its aims without descending into turmoil or despotism. However, perceptive observers note unsettling signs beneath the apparent success. The violence that began with the storming of the Bastille has not vanished. Rather, it has spread throughout the entire kingdom. Economic troubles persist despite the political changes. International powers watch with unease as revolutionary ideas threaten to extend beyond national boundaries. The revolution has unleashed energies beyond the control of its leaders. The citizens who took part in key uprisings have tasted empowerment and are unlikely to relinquish it easily, even to revolutionary rulers. Though the monarchy has been humbled, it is not eradicated, causing ongoing friction between old authority and new legitimacy. Most worryingly, the revolution has raised expectations that might not be met. Political equality has been declared, yet economic inequality remains. Individual rights are professed, but not fully secured. Collective challenges remain unresolved as the divide between revolutionary promises and practical results allows space for more extreme solutions to develop.